I think the most frightening is that the industry is concentrated around a few very big companies.
Right.
And we've known in history that concentrations of power, whether it's political power or business power, never serves the rest of us well in the long term.
Well, Azeem, welcome. So please introduce yourself, your job title.
I'm Azeem Azhar, and I'm the founder of Exponential View, an author and an independent researcher. I'm really interested in understanding how and why the world is changing so quickly, mostly because of technology.
Right, and tell us where your journey on this started, because I read your book, your wonderful book, The Exponential Age, and you described how, I think it was 1979, in Zambia, your neighbor first got something called a computer and assembled it, and you started to play with that. That's where this journey, this fascination began.
Yeah, it's really remarkable. My dad was working in Zambia for the British government, and we were out there as expats, and my neighbour shows up with this computer. We'd only seen them in TV shows and science fiction shows. There were programs like Star Trek and Space 1999 at the time. And when we moved back to the UK, the wonderful British entrepreneur, Sir Clive Sinclair, was developing his ZX series of computers. And my mum bought us the ZX81, which I still have in my office. And that was really the first time I got hands-on with a computer and found them remarkable. And as a little boy, to be able to play with something like that was also on our TV screens through Star Wars and Blake 7 and then later Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy was really remarkable. And I think we were just lucky. It was a lucky moment in time.
Just how more powerful, we're always told, our cell phone is a million times more powerful than the whole computing power of Apollo 11 when it went to the moon. But if you compare that Sinclair computer to today, just give people some idea of how much we've moved on.
It's so difficult to say in any terms that humans ordinarily understand, William. One way to think about this is that a computer is based on chips. Chips have these little things called transistors in them that switch on and off. My ZX81 had a couple of thousand transistors in it. Your modern 2024 smartphone probably has 10 trillion transistors in it, and that is a measure of how much faster, how much more processing it can do. So billions of times faster in a sense. But what does it really mean? It just means that we can do these quite magical things with our everyday devices. I mean, I just reflect on being able to look at your photo album and see it ordered by person or by mood or by emotion or by place, which is what a smartphone that we can buy for a couple of £100 can do today. And that's really a measure of how far we've come.
And that is this very exciting future, this exponential age that we're living in. But just to complete your story, how did you get from that Sinclair computer in Zambia all those years ago, how did you get to where you are now?
Well, I was just, again, very lucky because the UK was a hotspot for computing, because after we had the Sinclair, we had the BBC Micro and this program that was run by the BBC to teach people about IT, and so that stuck with me throughout my life. I didn't study computing at university. I studied social sciences, but being able to use a computer gave me a distinct advantage. And my first experience, in a sense, in business was setting up a student newspaper, and we were able to use computers with desktop publishing in 1991, and we were amongst the first to do it. Most of the national newspapers had yet to do that, and that is where I started to fall into working with technology. And then over the subsequent 25 years, I worked as an entrepreneur, founding my own technology companies, some of which used technologies that today we would call AI, but we didn't call them that a decade ago, and also investing in some interesting startups, some of which also do what we would today call AI. And if you've ever used the voice-controlled box called the Alexa that Amazon bought one of the companies I'd invested in that made that a core part of that technology. So I was in the industry for 25 years, and for the last decade, I've been researching and writing this exponential change.
So you're an ideal person to talk to, which is why we're talking
Yeah, I hope so.
About that change and about the arrival now of artificial intelligence.
Yeah.
That is the point we've got to now. And one of the phrases that really stuck with me from your book is that you said that we're entering an entirely new era of human history. Now, that is a really big statement, and that is partly because of artificial intelligence arriving. But there'll be many people listening to us they've heard about artificial intelligence, but they're not sure what it means, what that really covers. It could be the algorithm that is giving you your recommended Spotify tunes, or it could now be a humanoid robot that is going to start walking around. Give people some definition or some idea of what we're talking about when we say artificial intelligence.
Well, your question encapsulates the problem with the definition. The word AI, or the phrase AI, is quite unhelpful. It was dreamed up by scientists in 1956 to come up with a new field of study, and they chose the phrase artificial intelligence rather than cybernetics because they wanted to exclude a particular professor who they thought might be a bit argumentative. Now, academic arguments are often around very small, trivial matters, and this argument resulted in using the phrase artificial intelligence, a way of researching how we create machines that can behave similarly to humans in the way that we express our intelligence. And within a few years of that 1956 conference, some of those scientists were predicting that AI would be able to do anything a human could do, from greasing a car to reading Shakespeare. So they thought that by 1970 we'd be able to do that. And the reason I say it's unhelpful is because sciences are fields of inquiry. They're not engineering disciplines where we try to produce something. And so that vision, I think, has confused how we think about AI. So the way I think about AI is, what are the useful and practical tools and technologies that can do the type of cognitive or thinking tasks that humans can do? Things like understanding what somebody is saying and transcribing that into text. Things like looking at a picture and working out whether there is a car in the road or not. And I take the view, with my economist lens on, that AI should really be about functional products that help humans achieve more. That can sit alongside this theoretical field of study and science, which is incredibly valuable. But we should be clear when we're talking today and when people are listening that a large part of our world, as you so rightly say, already has AI in it, Spotify recommendations, and a lot of the things that we hear about on the media are the realm of speculative research or future scenarios rather than tangible realities.
But it's moving on very quickly, isn't it, when we think about what it can and can't do? And it's going, really is your exponential point, I think, that it's going on even faster than that revolution in computing that we've had the last 40 years or so that you were describing. We used to have Moore's law, which is every 18 months to 2 years, you can get twice as many transistors on a chip. That's why that phone has trillions of transistors compared to only a couple of thousand in the Sinclair computer. But AI seems to be growing faster than that. What ChatGPT can do or something like that is now accelerating faster than that. Would that be a true statement?
I think it's very true, and you can see it in the data. You can see it in the evidence. There's a double exponential that is going on within AI. We're able to throw much more computing power at these systems, and we're able to feed them with progressively more data. And that is why things like ChatGPT are able to surprise us if we use it very, very well. And I think it's worth noting that I write in my book, which came out in 2021, briefly about GPT-3, which is the AI system that was predated ChatGPT by a couple of years. And what I didn't predict was just how quickly you would get a product that is as useful as ChatGPT is. But I wasn't the only one, because the people at OpenAI will tell you that they didn't predict how powerful ChatGPT could be in the weeks before they launched it, and they certainly didn't expect it to have the impact it's had in the past year and a half. And what's happened is that it's not just a technological miracle. We should realize that this isn't something that happens without human action and the spirit of competition. Because ChatGPT showed that this new technology was possible, that you could talk to your computer and it would talk back to you, and that you could do useful things in business with it, companies started to invest. Microsoft, then Alphabet, which owns Google, and then the venture capitalists, and then the big established banks and the consultancies and the insurance companies started to want to invest in these technologies to bring them to use. And of course, an influx of capital speeds up the rate of innovation. We saw that happen in England during the Industrial Revolution centuries ago.
So now we've got amazing things. You can give a prompt to software and it can come up with a film for you.
Not a very good film at this point.
But again, that's going to improve a lot, isn't it? Very quickly. There are new AI tools that can identify cancerous growths from CT scans more effectively than a human can. Are there things, do you think, that AI will never be able to do? There are many things it can't do now, but is there anything that is permanently beyond the reach of AI?
That's a philosophical question. It's an important one. It's a very difficult one to address, and I think people will fall on one of two sides. One side will say that there is some élan vital, there is something special in the way in which biological brains like ours have evolved, the way they interact with each other, that you can't build through engineering. And there'll be others who will say our intelligence, our awareness, our sense of self obviously arises from a physical substrate, the molecules that make up the cells in our brains and in our bodies. Why should that behavior be tied to the particular type of biology rather than silicon system? And so in that view, of course, at some point, an AI should be able to do anything that a human can do. And that happens to be the view that I take, but many people smarter than me take the other view, and some agree with me. As to whether that's something that's likely to happen in the next 5 or 10 years rather than much further down the track, I would also say that a lot of people would disagree with what I'm about to say, which is I think it will be much further down the track. But very many exceptional computer scientists with storied careers would say it's going to happen earlier. And the summary of all of that is probably we don't really know, and there's a wide scientific disagreement about when.
And it will be able, even if there's some things that we can do that it can't do, there will be other things where it can go way beyond what we can do, and that is very exciting, but could be very dangerous thing. AI is now, they're talking about discovering many types of new materials, dozens more types of materials than have ever been known to science before, that we couldn't have worked out ourselves. So this is going to go far beyond human knowledge and cognition, isn't it?
It is, but our tools have always gone beyond our capabilities. That's why we used horses and carts, and then cars and power drills and vacuum cleaners. So that there's no difference in a sense. And I'm really excited by some of the possibilities that you have described. We sit on the precipice of this climate crisis, where so much of what we need in the world, not just in Britain but globally, is dependent on putting CO2 out into the atmosphere to make the nitrogen fertilizers, to make steel, the billions of tons we use every year, to make cement and concrete, to build the infrastructure and the homes that people need. And we need to find more elegant ways of doing this. I mean, it can't be that cement, which we've used in some form or other for 10,000 years, is the last word in building materials. I mean, there must be a better way. We just don't know how to do it. And what we're starting to see is that AI systems are helping us invent those new molecules and materials which we could build in sustainable ways, which partly starts to help tackle that climate emergency. And so for us to be equipped with superpowers of that type feels like it's a good thing. I mean, it just feels like a good thing.
It might be the way in which we save ourselves. It might be I don't know if you read the book by James Lovelock, Novacine, the man who invented the Gaia theory many decades ago, who basically argued in his book when he was 99 years old that it was only by inventing a higher form of intelligence than ourselves that humans would be able to save themselves, that they would be able to invent the technologies that would save us from climate change.
Well, I think that there's a lot in that argument, but just take a look at what's happened with the discovery of particular proteins. So proteins are essential for food. They're essential for pharmaceuticals, and they're also essential for building materials. And DeepMind, which is based in London, built a product called AlphaFold, and AlphaFold was an AI system that could discover the structure of proteins. And the average PhD researcher might take a couple of years to uncover the structure of a single protein, which is what you need to know in order to make use of it. And AlphaFold essentially found the structures of every protein that is possible, including those that we haven't come across, and it did so in about 18 months. Now that is, it's a little bit like manna from heaven. That is a resource now that humanity has to draw upon, and if there is something valuable in there that helps us come up with a new roof covering that can be grown sustainably, well, we've solved many years of the discovery process already. So I'm really optimistic about these tools as tools of scientific inquiry, as tools of productivity, because they make us better.
And this optimism is reassuring, I think, for a lot of people, because last year, thousands of experts, including Elon Musk, wrote a letter to say, wrote a joint statement saying, basically, stop us doing AI. We don't really know how this works. The large language models, we don't really know how they work, and it would be better to stop us all. And I looked at that as a former politician, and I thought, well, there's no way anybody's going to stop them. Because, of course, the United States will want better AI than China, and the same the other way around. And also, these are very powerful companies that are pursuing it, so nobody is going to stop it. So we do now have to find the good side of it. We have to engage with it. Just on a practical point for somebody listening to us who doesn't know much about AI, how should they actually engage with it? How do they actually start and say, okay, I need to really get involved with this now? Of course, it may already be around them in many things that they're using, but what else should they do?
They can use ChatGPT or one of the other chatbots that's out there. There are several of them. Gemini from Google, there's one called Claude, and you just need to use them for a few hours. It's like anything you do. You can't start to appreciate tennis after 20 minutes. You need a few hours. You can't appreciate bread making after 10 minutes. You need to bake a few loaves. You have to spend a few hours with one of these chatbots on things that matter to you before you start to really understand and feel what it can do for you. And what do I mean by what matters to you? Well, we've had a lot of rain in the UK over the past few months. My garden was horribly waterlogged. I mean, it was ankle deep in water. And I had a chat with ChatGPT back and forth. I live in North London. I've got clay soil. My water garden is this waterlogged in this way. It has these plants. And we had a 3,000 or 4,000 word chat, and it came up with some pretty robust recommendations and that helped me avoid having to do really expensive remedial work and hire in a landscape drainage experts. My gardener and I have just started to put those steps into place. I think once you do that, you start to get a sense of what it is to have this power at your fingertips. Now, is ChatGPT the best garden advisor? Probably not, in the same way that it's not the best marketing manager. But it was better than where I was, and that was good enough. And so the way I think people get involved is they start to play with it themselves, and I really hope people do.
Why is that better than Googling, what shall I do about my waterlogged garden? Just again, bring to life for somebody the added richness of this.
That's an excellent question. When you Google a particular problem that you have, you get a list of web pages that query matches, and they might be helpful for that first question you have, but you may have follow-on questions because you didn't understand it the first time, or you've realized something new because you've got the result. So when you're working with one of these chatbots, it's a little bit like talking to perhaps your favorite teacher from school about a subject that you're interested in but don't know a lot about. And you can ask them a question, they can give you an answer. In that answer, you might realize something, and you could say, so is it a bit like this, which is something else you know? And the teacher would respond with, yes, that's a good analogy, and you could think of it in this way. The chatbot will respond in a very, very similar way. And once you start to go have that back and forth with the chatbot, you can realize that you've got this half intelligence at your hands. Before we met, I told it who I was, and I told it who you were, and I gave it a paper that you and Tony Blair had written a couple of years ago, which is sort of excellent perspective on what science policy should be. And I said, I'm meeting William Hague. What are the types of things that I could talk about with him when we meet? And it came up with 8 or 10 suggestions, and I challenged some of them because they weren't good enough.
So we didn't really need to have you along to this discussion.
Well, I mean, for now, I think it's nice to have me. I will be a bit more left field than the chatbot, but maybe in a few years.
These 8 to 10 things to discuss, they were good ideas, were they?
I think they were pretty good ideas if you and I were meeting for lunch. Less helpful for this particular conversation because you've got a particular direction in which you want to take it that I didn't know, so I couldn't feed that into the system.
But within another year or two, that same program will probably predict all of those things.
It'll certainly get better. Yeah, it'll certainly get better. I mean, one of my favourite one of the most interesting things that we've learnt over the year that these chatbots has been out is that when you put them in work contexts, they're incredibly equalizing. So academics from some of the best universities of the world have tested this in various places. And what they found is that the bottom half of employees have their work quality raised to the level of the top quarter. Now, that's wonderful if you're a boss, because you've now increased the number of first-rate employees you've got. But it's also wonderful if you're a human, and all of us are bottom 50% in something, and now we've got something that helps us do better and be better. And it's a bit like, when I was a kid, I got when I moved from having a wooden tennis racket to one of the sort of fiber tennis rackets, my tennis improved. I enjoyed it much more. I contributed much more to my school's tennis community. I was not in a team. And I think that is one of the humanizing dimensions of the technology that we don't talk about, which is we enable people.
So it's leveling up. This is great news for politicians who've promised leveling up, and this could deliver it. Unlike most of the other things,
it could be a leveling up tool.
And it's a really important point, because actually, given a major problem in the world is inequality, and a gulf between people who own capital but who just work in the gig economy for some of those big tech firms. Right. This then could be part of the answer. This is part of the exciting opportunity here, if we use it in the right way.
If we use it in the right way, it's enabling. In other words, it creates a possibility to do that. But what the bosses choose to do, and how they choose to lean on the political establishment to push the playing field into their favor is a different issue. And I think that what we can do is we can say the technology can help in these ways, but that doesn't stop the political argument and the argument of participation that still needs to go alongside.
And what if that's a glimpse of the excitement and the potential of AI? What about, let's just have a quick look at the dangers before we come on to the speed of it and what will happen. What's the most frightening thing that is happening in AI? People are talking about, well, there's obvious disinformation running up to elections. There can be discrimination inherent in the AI. What to you is the most frightening thing that is happening?
I think the most frightening is that the industry is concentrated around a few very big companies.
Right.
And we've known in history that concentrations of power, whether it's political power or business power, never serves the rest of us well in the long term. These large companies may compete with each other. They may even compete with each other on the dimensions that you talked about. They may say, well, ours is more truthful or ours is less discriminatory. But at the end, they are competing simply to be more powerful than each other, to then do what powerful companies, whether it's Standard Oil in America from 150 years ago, or any other very large, powerful business, what they will do, which will be to skew the rules, skew the systems in their favor. And, you don't need any technology insight to know that. You just need to be a student of history, which is too much unchecked power ends up with bad outcomes. So that's the thing that I do worry about more than most.
That, again, thinking of my old profession as a politician, this is a huge problem, isn't it? Because, those Standard Oil or whatever it was in the past, antitrust legislation, their power built up over decades, and then legislators had some years to work out what to do about it. But here in this exponential world, this comes very quickly. Politicians take a couple of years to notice what has happened, then civil servants take a couple of years to advise them what to do, then that's all done wrong in the first place. About 6 or 7 years later, you get some working body of regulation. By then, it's all changed. And competition law in business is set up in a particular way, but not really for a world in which businesses change so quickly and the amount of data that they possess becomes a decisive advantage. There's no control really on that. So for politicians, this is going to be an enormous problem, isn't it? It's already an enormous problem.
It is an enormous problem, and it is really present. So the next Parliament, whenever it starts, that 5-year period will be a critical period where AI will go everywhere. And the reason I say it will go everywhere is that if you look at how long it takes digital technologies to go from the niches to the mainstream, it's typically between about 7 and 10 or 12 years. I mean, the iPhone replaced the old Nokia phone with buttons in about 7 years. And lots of data shows that is the amount of time this process will take. We've made arguments that AI is moving faster, and I think it is moving faster than something like the iPhone. So 5 years is long enough for us to go from a few of us nibbling around the edges of ChatGPT to this being used by every company and by every part of the public services and by every Briton. And so that's the period of time in which we have to get to grips with these issues and be proactive about intervening when we need to. We didn't do this with social media. Neither did the public get engaged, nor did government get engaged. Social media moved very quickly, probably a bit slower than this will, and we've seen the harms writ large as a consequence. So I think it's a really important moment, and whoever will be sitting in number 10 for that period of time needs to make sure they've got their eyes on it.
Well, they really do, and you kindly referred earlier to a paper I'd written with Tony Blair, which I would say Blair and I are like two old guys on a park bench, ruminating about what might have been and what we would do, and but we both think with the benefit of some distance we can,
right.
We can see what's happening perhaps better than people who are in the daily thick of politics, and whoever wins the next election is really going to have to be on top of this, and they're going to have to position this country to be at the forefront of innovation and artificial intelligence, but also to help people through this and safeguard against the dangers. So I think this absolutely has to be top of the political agenda, but it probably won't be what people are arguing about every day of the election campaign. It will change, of course, the how elections are conducted. It's only 30 years since I was standing with a loud hailer in the middle of villages, trying to address the whole village at one time, or in a public meeting, a public hall. And now you would actually have information on all of those voters individually and send them social media messages, and politics has been fragmented. So this will change politics in a dramatic way, and these responsibilities of government, exactly as you say. So what are the other, if that's at the needs to be the top of the list of the next government, let's think about some of the other challenges they're going to face as a result, like jobs, for instance. I think you said, and you pointed out in your book, that massive technological change almost always creates more jobs than it destroys, but it can have a very short-term adverse effect, a profound effect. It can destroy a lot of jobs in the early stages. Now, that sounds like social and economic upheaval. It sounds like that's a very disorientating and distressing thing for a lot of people. Is that what's on the way?
Well, we're at a point in the UK where we've got very, very low unemployment, and there are skills shortages and worker shortages from in the construction industry, in the haulage industry, of course, in healthcare, and in education as well. So we actually have a skills deficit and a people deficit. But what you will see as this technology rolls out is that there'll be particular industries which become less competitive and firms that become less competitive, and that's when jobs will go. And so if the net result is job creation, and economists will often focus on the net result. In other words, how many were created and how many were lost, and is that positive? We also have to just focus on the jobs that are lost. In other words, the people who hear that their department is being closed because of AI or for any other reason, we need to think about that. So the jobs question to me is really about about this. It's number one, are British businesses in a position to take advantage of this technology to become more competitive and more productive, and therefore grow? And if they grow, they will be able to hire more people, and they will be able to hopefully develop local economies. And that has to be our starting point, which is, do small and medium-sized businesses feel they have the capabilities to take advantage of this? Once we do that, we can then start to think about two other issues. One is what support is needed to provide a dignified experience and an experience that is generative for people who are in particular job types or sectors where they can't now compete because of the nature of the technology. And I don't think we can say what those are a priori. And that might involve, William, actual government policy towards those types of changes.
A government policy, just explain that a bit more, because, it has to be generative, and so on. People will be, let's explain what we mean by that. You mean the government intervening to give people, to create work for those people, or to help them to retrain or be educated in?
I think back to the BBC Micro movement in the early 1980s, where we had a national movement to say, let's all learn about computing, and the BBC supported it in a way they probably couldn't today. A lot of this starts with great storytelling and great narratives. That's what Tony Blair was good at. That's what Margaret Thatcher was good at. Here is a direction in which we're going to travel, and then you can accommodate some of the pain that goes alongside that. So when I say generative and dignified, I think it has to start with a sense of the economy is going to move into a better space, which means it will also be better for your community, and it will be better for you. That's why this is happening. And once you have that narrative in place, you then have to back it up with the right set of policies. And those policies, I think, would be to ensure that there is retraining available, and to ensure that it's easy for local businesses to grow quickly. So there are vacancies available for workers who are being retrained as a result of job losses. Now, whether that's actually taxation funding it, or whether it's mandates to companies to say, if you need to be spending money on retraining, or if you are making redundancies of a certain scale, you need to make some kind of commitment or disclosure that says you're ensuring that there is a bridge to a new job for these people. I don't mind. I'm not saying that the Exchequer has to fund all of this, but I do think that this is a place where a clear government policy can come in and ease that transition. What we want to avoid is, I think, what happened in the early 1980s, when the coal mines were shut down very, very quickly without actually any sense of where those workers would go next, right? We can learn from that painful experience if this happens again.
So you're saying a very big thing, really, which is in the next parliament, the next 5 years, change is going to happen on this scale, really, such a big scale to people's jobs, that we will need to do something. Either the company, the government, whoever it is going to need to do something to really help a large number of people into new types of jobs. What will those jobs be, do you think? Because we could all think of routine jobs that might disappear with AI. There will be people working in, sitting here in London surrounded by lots of law firms. There will be people who suddenly the AI can go through all the documents and come up with a legal summary and perhaps even start a negotiation. So what are they going to be? What do you think they might be doing instead of that?
Well, what we've seen in the past is that you move from a job that's data entry to a job that is about analyzing that data, to a job that is then about making decisions on the analysis of the data, and so there is a ladder of upskilling that takes place, and it's happened in industries over the last decades. So you would expect there to be new ways of working with the analysis that has come out of these AI systems. What you then need to be able to do is have a sufficiently entrepreneurial economy that allows businesses to take advantage of higher skilled workers. And that's why I think that this particular challenge is not a challenge that splits neatly across ideological lines, because on the one hand, we need to make sure that there are policies that allow for effectively people's protection during this a period of economic change. But on the other hand, we need to have policies that drive entrepreneurialism, because it's the entrepreneur on the front line in their local town or county who sees what a new opportunity is and needs to be able to build their business quickly and start to employ people for it. And so it is something that I think has to have a new kind of political consensus, rather than one that is, obviously coming from the right or coming from the left. And then, of course, there will be the jobs, I think, that robots or AI systems will constantly struggle with, at least for the next few years, which will be the highly socialized jobs and places where we actually want there to be human connection, which might be in care, or it might be in education, or it might be in health.
I think this is one of the big issues here, isn't it, about AI? You referred to a huge issue earlier. There's an opportunity here to level up, and it will be a big question mark over AI, whether it does that or whether it makes us more unequal. But another big question is it going to give us more space to be human? Is it going to do a lot of the routine things, the boring things that many people have to do, but give us more time to spend with friends and families, more time to go out for a run on a spring morning, more time to enjoy being human in every way? Is it going to do that, or is it going to draw us into relationships with machines? And being sucked into those algorithms and having our values and priorities decided somewhere else by some machine somewhere. That dystopian vision of the future. Is it going to make us more human or less human? Isn't that one of the big questions here?
It might do both, and which one wins out will depend person to person. I think back to when the BlackBerry first came out. This was a phone that was the first phone that would get email immediately. And for years, people who got BlackBerries, often in the finance industry, would take so much pleasure and pride in responding to an email within a couple of seconds of the chirp showing up. And that's crazy now. I mean, we wouldn't think of taking pride for the 500 notifications a day that our phone gets in clearing them instantly, and we have already become, in some sense, slaves to those machines through notifications on the phone and through the algorithms on social media, and that the decision to live in a more human way again is one that I think citizens' participation, but also political leaders and anyone else who has a public face can help shape. So, do I believe that through these technologies we can move at more of a human speed and more of a human scale? I believe it's possible to get there. What would get in the way? What would get in the way, I think, would be commercial incentives. So the incentives that, in particular, the big tech companies have for us to spend our time in their devices and making them, advertising revenue. But also, I think the desire to make things efficient, so that we, rather than dealing with people, we deal with systems, and we're forced to conform to those systems. And I think that is part of what could be a grand debate of exactly what kind of interactions do we want with each other, and how much of it do we want to feel is being driven by efficiency, and how much of it do we want it to be what I picture as a lovely bucolic scene of you and Tony Blair sitting on a park bench somewhere in Wales, looking at the sunset and just letting the clock tick.
Yes, that's a bit too bucolic. I think Tony Blair will definitely reject that vision. What you're pointing to, everything that you've been saying makes the case very well for how people have to get ready for this, despite the speed of exponential change. It can help you with your gardening, it turns out, but it's also going to be essential in order to have a job in the future, to really understand what's going on. You make that case extremely well. But how are we going to prepare people for that? And how are we going to, well, let me ask this question. We can come back if necessary, how we're going to prepare people for it. How are we really going to make sure those big tech companies are joining in that exercise? I mean, you've just been talking about their power. Does that mean we have to start to regulate them as utilities? Really, and so you've become an essential service. Mm-hmm. So now your prices are controlled by the government, and the quality of what you do is overseen by regulators in detail. And we will force you to divest anything that is giving you an unfair competitive advantage. Or do we go even further? Do we say these people have to be, the people who run these companies, they have to be approved by Congress and Parliament? You know, they have to be elected in some way because their power is becoming greater than elected governments. I'm making up ideas here, but this is so huge that we are going to have to tackle these sorts of questions, aren't we?
We are going to have to tackle them. And I do think that there's a lot of what the big tech companies do that looks like a utility or an essential service. You cannot live in Britain in 2024 without internet access, without a mobile phone, without all of these digital services. And the tech companies have additional powers in the sense that they can actually shape our experiences through the content and that we're exposed to and the adverts that we're exposed to. I like to look at places where we have made progress. It's easy to bash the politicians and bash the political system, but there is a new agency called the Digital Markets Unit being set up in the Competition and Markets Authority. There's some new statute that's going through that will formalise its capabilities. And one of the things that unit will be able to do is look at the tech companies on a case-by-case basis and say, here are the types of issues that we think your market position is going to skew how consumers sort of experience the world, or skew the competitive field, and we're going to ask you to do certain things to make sure that you don't do that. And so we've actually made some progress in the direction that your question laid out. And the CMA,
the Competition and Markets Authority.
Yes, the Competition and Markets Authority has dozens of data scientists, which is, this new job that didn't exist a decade ago. And so we can say government and the regulators always move slowly, but sometimes they do catch up. And so there is a glimmer of a sense that someone will start to look at this question of power. What I don't know is if it's sufficient to look at it solely through the lens of people as consumers, as opposed to a lens that is a wider civic lens, right? How should we think of the average Briton as a citizen, as a member of a community, a person who lives in a particular town, not just as someone who buys something for next day delivery? And I don't know, to be honest, I'm not close enough to the detail to know where we get protected from those angles.
But this is about, again, what you've been describing this is about everything. This is about our future skills. It's about our future economic growth. It's about how government is organized. It's about what it means to be human. I mean, I think we're making the case as we have this conversation for this being one of the most important subjects in the world, and one of the biggest challenges for all of us. But let's just think about, before we conclude, a couple of the other challenges it brings and what we can do about that. One is deep fakes and misinformation. Now, I've had, for my entire political life, I had people impersonating me. I'm one of the most easily impersonated people by Rory Bremner and lots of other people. So I've always known there could be a fake. And somebody once, when Tony Blair was Prime Minister, someone once got through to him in his bedroom pretending to be me, having got through the Downing Street switchboard saying, I'm William Hague and I want to talk to Tony Blair. They got straight through. So I've always known that. But now somebody with a few seconds recording of my voice, or indeed anybody's voice, can produce a pretty convincing fake of that person. What sort of thing do we have to do to stop that, meaning that we just don't know what to believe anymore?
The technology companies will work really hard to try to find technologies and systems that protect us from those types of fakes. That won't be perfect, and that will take time. But we have to rely on them because they provide the infrastructure. Then the other thing we have to do is recognize that trust, skepticism, criticality within a society is not dependent on technology. It's dependent on a lot of other variables, and we have to work to strengthen those. The BBC now has a thing called BBC Verify, which is a specialist unit of experts which goes through particular news stories, unfortunately often after the story has been released.
Yeah, and there can be more people who saw the original story
of
than
course
ever see the verification.
But it's a good start, and perhaps they could put the verification people at the beginning of the process, and perhaps other media companies can do that. Perhaps we can get the political parties to agree that they will not use deepfake technology, and they will not encourage their allies to use deepfake technology. We'd also need to start to invest in people, in the types of media literacy, the questioning of authenticity and provenance that means some people are less susceptible to deepfakes than others. And there are countries like Finland and Singapore that have working policies within education that do that. But of course, the beauty of education is that it can be universal. The drawback is that it takes decades to have an impact. And so I think whatever we do with this question of fakes and truth, we have to recognize it's not just about the technology. It's as much about big red buses with impeachable claims on them driving around the country. And we have to ask everyone who participates in the public sphere, where do they stand on these questions? Are they willing to stand up for a sense of veracity, and then back that up with informal agreements, voluntary agreements, or even formal ones?
Now you've got me really worried, because I agree with all of that we need to do all of that. But let's say everybody in all our political parties signed up to that. No deep fakes, and we had good means of spotting them. And every time a fake story came out, the BBC or somebody else showed whether it was true or not, and everybody immediately looked at that. We need to get to that situation. But we will still have, even if we do that, a Russian sitting somewhere in the Urals spewing out other deep fakes,
but
which
those
we
fakes
can't stop coming into our society.
But those fakes have to go through a social network. And so you could start to ask the social networks, or they could do this voluntarily, to disclose how many fakes they see across their system, how many they automatically stopped, how long fakes that they hadn't automatically stopped lived in their systems, and how many people were exposed to them. And then you have something that you can measure, and you have something that you can manage. And you could potentially through secondary legislation or some other mechanism start to enforce behavior to say you need to invest much more in making sure that fakes don't get distribution across your social network. So I think that there are some tangible, practical things that you could start to do as well. But ultimately, this is going to be a series of leaky sieves, which are not going to hold the water for very long. And that means that investments at each layer are going to be required. And I do think that people are a key part of it, both the politicians and just the ordinary blokes like me.
So it's a big challenge, but let's try to draw together what we've been discussing here. I saw an interview recently with a professor of AI from Stanford University in California. He's called Eric Brynjolfsson, who made a very important remark, I think, because he said, this could be the best decade ever in human history, what's coming up. But it could also be one of the worst. And this really is what we've been describing, a world which could be dramatically better or worse, not just bumbling along like we're used to. The human brain is programmed for just quite gradual change. What do you think the world will look like a decade from now? Are we in for the best decade ever or one of the worst?
I think if things go south, it will be because of a really big geopolitical problem. I mean, it will be a war of some sort that would be involve one or two of the great powers, and that feels like it's just something that might happen that we can't necessarily control for. But if that doesn't happen, then the capacity that's created by AI, an engaged citizenry, podcasts like this, helping people to make sense of it and hopefully encouraging them to get involved, creates the space that Eric Brynjolfsson is alluding to, high levels of productivity and enterprise and engagement. And if that comes to pass, we won't have seen a decade quite like it, probably not in living memory.
So that's a good. So as long as we can avoid that war, and as long as we don't let AI or lethal autonomous weapons or whatever, because that's an aspect we haven't
absolutely
discussed, the integration of AI into weapons systems or into diplomacy, where it could make mistakes. As long as we can avoid that, you are on the optimistic side of all of this. We're tending towards that side, what might be a great improvement in the human condition.
I'm definitely on the optimistic side. I'm pragmatically optimistic because there's work that has to be done. I also think that Britain is quite well placed for it. We have a very, very strong research orientation. We have great universities. We've got an industry, an economy that has already moved towards being rather digital, which is what our services industry has been for a couple of decades. So we're quite well positioned. And we also have access to capital with a thriving venture capital market that can support innovation. So we are quite well positioned. Lots of the building blocks are in place for us to take advantage of all of this. And I do think that, once we know what the Parliament will look like over the next 5 years, certain debates will go away, and the country can start to concentrate on this opportunity that is a meaningful opportunity of the levelling up, as you described earlier, that is about participation and it's about economic growth.
Well, on that inspiring note, which I completely agree with, that is the big opportunity in this country. I think you've really demonstrated the massive importance of this to individuals, companies, governments. So thank you for your expertise and your knowledge and your optimism. Thank you very much, Azeem.
Thank you.